Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another writing video. So today I'm going to be talking about motivation and why the way we often talk about motivation in relation to writing isn't really that accurate and also isn't really that helpful. So I've spent a lot of time in the writing community, and one topic that I've noticed come up over and over and over is the topic of motivation. How do you find the motivation to write? What do you do when you don't have the motivation to write? People worrying about why they don't have the motivation to write, if this means they're not a real writer. So today I wanted to talk about a different perspective on motivation, because I think the way that it's often framed isn't really that helpful. So overall, I think the idea of motivation is actually misleading. This is kind of the general idea about writing and motivation. Writing a novel is hard. Therefore, because it's a hard thing, it requires a lot of motivation to do, like other difficult things. For the sake of this video and this analogy, we're going to compare it to climbing a mountain. Climbing a mountain is also a very hard thing to do that is going to require a lot of motivation in order to actually get to the top. If you weren't motivated, if you didn't care, you're probably not going to see it through. So the common idea about motivation is if you don't have the kind of the will, the desire, the passion, the motivation to climb that mountain, you're not going to do it. You're going to quit before getting to the top because you just don't care enough, and it's such a hard thing to do. And this idea frames motivation as something that just comes from within. You have it or you don't. You have to find that motivation within you to get to the top of the mountain, or it's not going to happen. Your motivation needs to overcome the difficulty of the task. But there are a lot of reasons why someone might not make it to the top of a mountain. Maybe they don't have the right gear or equipment or warm enough clothing. Maybe they haven't done the right kind of training or preparation. They've attempted a task that's too overwhelming for their current skill level. Maybe they haven't had access to the right kind of mentorship or guidance. Maybe they're attempting this alone when they would be better working with some kind of guide or expert or instructor, or even just fellow climbers to help them. Maybe they're taking the wrong route to the top. You can have all the motivation in the world. This could be your lifelong passion to climb this mountain. But if you don't have the right gear, you don't have the right tools, and you don't have the right training, you probably won't make it to the top, even if you do have that motivation. And what I think happens a lot in the writing community is people who aren't getting to the top of that mountain, or in this case, finishing that book, because they don't have the right tools, the right training, the right support, etc., are just blaming it on motivation. They're being told they just aren't motivated enough, and they're asking themselves, why don't I have the motivation, when the motivation actually isn't the problem. These people who are trying to climb the mountain without the right tools or preparations or training, etc., they're not getting to the top because the journey is way more difficult than it needs to be. They're lacking motivation because the task is way more difficult than the task needs to be. So if they could have the proper tools, training, or whatever, the task could be easier. They'd be able to accomplish it. With this mountain analogy, we can also look at factors like the weather. The weather might force you to postpone your ascent up the mountain. You might have to delay it to the next day or the next week or the next month or the next year, who knows? It might force you to change your gear, your equipment, your clothing, maybe even your path to the top. It's something that you don't have control over, but it's most certainly going to be a factor. Sometimes you're going to luck out and it's just going to be clear skies, sunny days. Other days it's going to be stormy and there will be no visibility. It's going to be way too cold. Now let's say that there's a huge storm. Some people might be really experienced mountain climbers and they have like the most top-notch gear, so they can still make the ascent through the storm. Whereas someone else, this might be their first time climbing a mountain, they don't have as warm clothes. Maybe if the skies were clear, they would be able to make it to the top on that day, but because it's storming, they're not able to. Even in the same storm, not everyone will face the same challenges, and I think we can equate the weather in this analogy to our mental health. It's something that is most certainly going to be a factor when you're writing a book, but it's going to affect everyone differently. It's going to change and maybe shift over time. Sometimes you might just have to stop writing. You might have to pause your ascent up the mountain and wait till another day. Other times you just have to change how you're approaching the task. Weather, like our mental health, might be unpredictable. It might be ever changing and ever shifting. It might cause you to postpone your ascent to another day, another week, another year, who knows? Or just completely change how you're approaching things. But it's not like the instant a storm rolls in, your chance is done and over forever. It's not like the first time there's a hint of bad weather, or it's too cold or whatnot, you're done. You're never going to be able to write this book. It means you either have to wait for clearer skies, or you have to find a way to adjust and still make the ascent through the storm. It's not about finding the motivation within. It's about adapting to the circumstances and finding ways to make your ascent easier. Personally, I think that framing the process of writing a novel as being this battle of your internal motivation versus your inherent laziness really ignores all the reasons why a book might be difficult to write, but also the array of solutions out there that can make the writing process easier. I think low motivation is too often framed as an issue of just laziness, lack of passion or dedication or will, lack of organization or proper planning, being easily distracted, or having poor time management, and therefore frames the solution as you simply needing to overcome these things. The problem is inherent. You're lazy, you're easily distracted, you don't have good time management, you don't have the dedication, whatever. Therefore, the way to overcome that is just to overcome it, okay? Like, you got low motivation, you just have to find some motivation. Oh, you're easily distracted, focus better. Oh, you have poor time management skills, manage your time better, Don't waste time. Oh, you're not dedicated enough, remind yourself why you care about this, find the dedication, and that's just a huge oversimplification. It also makes it way harder for writers to understand how to actually approach the problem. If the problem is being framed as this just internal thing they have to overcome, and they have to overcome by just finding it within them. It makes it seem like the issue is just an innate issue within yourself, and the solution is just something you have to find within yourself, rather than it being a case of there being problems that you can actively solve and actively find ways to overcome. So if you feel like you don't have the motivation to write, it's not about just finding the motivation. Ask yourself, why aren't I motivated to write? What's the reason, For me, the biggest reason why I don't write is because something within the book is frustrating me. So next time you're struggling to write and you feel like you just don't have the motivation to write, instead of kind of beating yourself up and being like, oh my god, why don't I have the motivation? The real thing you should be asking yourself is, why don't I have the motivation? Like, what's holding me back? What really here is the cause of my low motivation? Because the thing is, if you have low motivation, something is probably causing that low motivation. If you can identify what's causing it, you can focus on actually fixing the problem. So this whole video was inspired by an ask that I got on Tumblr, and someone said that they tend to have no motivation to write after the first 20,000 words of their manuscript, and they were wondering what to do. I used to have this exact same problem. I think this is very common, right? A lot of writers are super excited at the start of their book, and then the shine kind of wears off a certain way through. I think around 20,000 words is fairly common. And that's the point where you start to feel a drop of motivation. Why is that? I think it's often framed as just, oh, well, the shine has worn off and you just don't care as much anymore. I think there are objective reasons. For me, the reason why I would lose motivation 20,000 words into a manuscript isn't because I didn't care as much or because I didn't want to write the book as much, but because by that point in the draft, problems would start to emerge and I would start to become frustrated with the quality. In order to fix this problem, I started writing much more slowly, so that I could focus more on the quality rather than the speed at which I wrote. This is why something like zero drafting or fast drafting doesn't work for me personally, but it might work for someone else because it might be the perfect thing to make their ascent easier. It doesn't work for me because the thing that impacts my motivation is frustrations with the quality of the work. And so if I write super fast and the draft is really messy, I get really frustrated and I lose motivation. So I solve that problem by writing more slowly and editing as I write. I think that this is a really important factor in the old plotting versus pantsing debate. It's just a matter of what works for the person, and I think this is a really good way to illustrate that. I'm a firm believer in the fact that fun writing is better writing, and if you're having fun while writing, the writing will turn out better than if you're not having fun. And sure, a novel is a long piece of work that takes a long time to write. You're probably not going to be having the most fun you've ever had in your life every single day that you work on the book. But if in general you can ask yourself, what's making my writing process less enjoyable? What's causing me to procrastinate? What's causing me to not want to write? And find active, concrete solutions to those problems, then you can overcome this issue of low motivation, which is usually symptomatic of something else. Usually if you have no motivation, it's for a reason. So what you have to do is ask yourself, why am I lacking motivation? Why am I not getting up this mountain? Like, what's holding me back? What solution can I implement to make my ascent easier? If your ascent up that mountain is harder than it needs to be, you're not going to want to do it. What makes one person's ascent easy is going to be different from what makes someone else's ascent easy, which is why I think it's especially important that writers do what works for them, find solutions that work for them, and don't really worry about what other people are preaching is the right way to write. Everyone has their own unique way to write, and using a process that just doesn't jive with you will probably cause more problems, will make the process harder, will make you not want to write, will cause that low motivation. And that can be an ever-changing thing. Like I said, the weather changes on the mountain, and it might change in your book and in your life and affect what you need to solve problems and write your book and get your work done, or maybe even not be getting your work done, and will change what you need to thrive and succeed as a writer at different times. Doing what works for you will make it so much easier for you to succeed because you won't be making your ascent more difficult. What we're gonna need as writers to succeed is ever shifting. So you kind of always just have to be adapting and asking yourself, what's impacting you right now, right? If you feel like something is negatively impacting your writing, it's like, okay, what's negatively impacting me and how can I create a solution to help me overcome this? So if you're struggling with motivation to write, I hope that this video was helpful. My question for this video is, what has been helping your ascent up the mountain? Like, what was a problem that you were having that was impacting your writing, and what solution did you implement to help get yourself past it? I hope if different people share different solutions that they've implemented to overcome different problems, it might give some examples or for some inspiration to people who are dealing with similar issues. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can send me an ask on Tumblr, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.